The worst financial advice I've ever heard is that you should pay off your debt before you do anything else. So when we want to break out of this cycle of what I call busy, broken, exhausted, the first place that we want to start to look, we want to look at where our money's going, but through the lens of, is this the appropriate amount of time to be spending on this?
You're listening to the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I'm Katie Kimball, founder of Kids Cook Real Food, and your host for today. My goal with this podcast is always to bring together experts in many fields, from finances to medicine to personal growth to parenting, because you know what? There really is no handbook for parenting, but we can learn a lot out there through podcasts on the internet. And that's the goal, is to raise healthy, independent kids who become healthy, independent adults. Today, we're talking money. Brie Sodano is my guest, and she is a nationally recognized personal finance expert and the founder of Cash Confident. You'll hear a little bit in our interview about her course, Find Your Bleed. And it's so good. It's for women, ladies. It's for we who manage our homes. And she does such a fantastic job of, what I love is she really flips a lot of paradigms of other financial advice and budgeting on their heads so that they work for every person and not just those who are really good at sticking to plans. Brie says that systems create success far more than plans. As a businesswoman, she teaches women how to build wealth and financial freedom, which inspires full life sovereignty and abundance, and I would add balance. Her methods are holistic and fantastically effective because they address the root cause of common money problems. I know you're going to enjoy this interview. I know you're going to take a plethora of practical advice from it. Let's get our finances in order so we can be good models for our kids. Oh man, we're talking money today. Thank you so much for being here, Brie.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm so excited.
Well, we got to start with your background. Like, what's your story? How did you get into finances? And why did you decide to start teaching people online?
When I got out of school, I worked a decade in the nonprofits. And there's 2 points of that are worth mentioning. One is I was so happy and I felt so fulfilled doing my work, but I was not making any money. And I got married young. We had kids young. I had a mortgage by the time I was 22. And I taught myself how to trade stock options in order to make enough money to be able to work at the Boys and Girls Club where I wanted to work. And that was actually super stressful. It's not a method for making money that I recommend. It's a little reckless, to be honest, but I did it and it was fun. And then some years later, I had outgrown it and I was just miserable and I was whining to my mother and she was like, well, you taught yourself how to trade stock options. Why don't you just go past the Series 7 and become a financial advisor? And I was like, oh, all right, Mom, that's a good idea. So I got all my credentials and licenses to sell stocks and bonds and mutual funds, insurances and things like that. And when I started working with clients, they were coming to see me and they were very successful people, like in life in general, running big companies, high up on the corporate ladder, pillars of the community. And they were coming to see me with credit card debt from 20 years ago, paying on their own student loans when their kids were about to go to school, having cash flow issues, having no money in savings. And they were coming to me with these problems that better investments just weren't going to solve. It just wasn't the solution. And so I started working with my clients on budgets, which was highly ineffective. Budgets actually don't work for the vast majority of people, which we could talk about later as we go. And then we started working on habits and that worked a bit better. And then we started working on mindset and that worked really, really well. And about that time I started my own business. I left my book of, I left the stockbroking, selling of the securities behind. And I just started working with people on the money management, the money mindset piece, because that was really what they needed.
My hair sort of stood on end when you were talking about really successful people who were coming to you. They're trying to invest their wealth, but they don't have any wealth because they have debt. Like, that's actually really terrifying. And I'm glad. Isn't that wonderful that you were like, well, I can't actually help you with the credentials that I have so far, but here's maybe what you need. I just love that whole story, how you stumbled into it. Okay. So you sort of mentioned that budgets don't work. So what's like the worst financial advice you've heard?
The worst financial advice I've ever heard is that you should pay off your debt before you do anything else.
Okay, tell me more.
So when it comes from an investment standpoint, there's a concept of compounding interest. So let's just say that you have money in your 20s, and well-invested money should double about every 10 years. So let's say that over the course of your 20s, you could have saved $10,000 or put that away, or put that towards your debt, not put it away, but like you could have put it towards your debt. And this, the mind frame around this is, well, why would I pay 20% when I'm only going to make 7 or 8% in the market? And I get that. But that's a really short-term thinking. So if the 10,000 that you would have put away in your 20s doubles in your 30s and in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s. So it's 10,000, 20,000, 40,000, 80,000. So the double that you miss is the 160,000.
Wow. So, okay. Yeah. I'm like, I'm an English major, so my math brain is slowly starting up here. So you're saying better to invest money and just continue to pay down the debt at like whatever monthly payments are.
Yeah, there's a little bit more to it, because if you have a lot of, this is credit card debt, I'm talking specifically about student loans, they hit a little bit different. But credit card debt, generally, we have to look at our habits. We have to look at our mindset. We have to learn how to save. We have to learn how to invest it to be able to be a person who has money, because we borrow the money with the credit card debt when we really need something or when we really want something and we don't have the money. So if we're always in a cycle of borrowing the money and then using our free cash flow to pay off the debt, we don't ever have the money. And so learning how to have money is really the way to get out of credit card debt. That habit of investing is something that we really want to have over a lifetime, and that builds more financial strength over a lifetime. When I was a financial advisor, sometimes clients would come see me and they'd be like, all right, well, I'm 49. My debt is finally paid off. Help me sort this out. And I'm like, there's not enough time in the market. There's not. You have to look at buying real estate, starting a business, doing something else. And that puts a lot of pressure on people, especially if now we're going to start saving $1,000 a month or something at 49. It's, you're not really set up. And so when we're avoiding putting money aside for the retirement piece, what we miss out as on the compounding interest. But it's not a comparison of the 8% in the market now to the 20% you'd pay in the credit cards. It's the doubles. Like that's how to look at it, because, if you're 54 at your financials office and you're like, well, everything's paid off now.
You don't have very many decades left
to double that money.
Double with the compound interest. Okay. This is fascinating. I recently heard, I think on the news, which I do not watch, but my in-laws watch. So I was captive. I was stuck. I heard the news. It was terrifying. But I recently heard that like 65% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. I think on one of the pages on your website, I saw in the 70s. To me, it just takes my breath away. It feels like a really bad idea. So we're talking to more than half of Americans out there. What's the first step? Like, how do you start managing your finances when you feel like you're on that hamster wheel of paycheck to paycheck?
Let's just take one step back and think about our primary resources. So time, money, and energy are, how like there's primary colors in the color wheel? Those are primary resources. You could turn time, money, and energy into a college degree, into a thriving business, into a flourishing sourdough, micro bakery. It doesn't matter. You could turn it into anything. And so we have to start to look at where those resources are going, because once we start to have scarcity, which is like scarcity is like lack and the fear of not enough kind of combined. So once we have scarcity in one of our resources, it takes only maybe 2 decisions before it's in another one. So let's just say I'm short on time. It's only going to be a matter of minutes before, like maybe a decision or 2 before that shortage of time becomes spending that's not intentional. Like I've definitely purchased soccer cleats because I didn't have time to find the soccer cleats that I knew I already have on the first day of practice. I don't know. I'm sure your people are probably like, oh yeah, I've done that, or I don't have time to cook. And so I'll just pick up lunch when we're out, and then once you're short, or if you're short on time, then you're white knuckling it to work. And really, that adds it costs a lot more energy to do the same amount of things. And so time, money, and energy are really, really interconnected. So when we want to break out of this cycle of what I call busy, broken, exhausted, the first place that we want to start to look, we want to look at where our money's going, but through the lens of, is this the appropriate amount of time to be spending on this? So for example, many of my clients come to see me, and when I look at their transactions, they're doing things like going to multiple grocery stores every week. And they're like, oh, I'm looking for the best deals, and you can get the cheapest granola at Aldi's, and you could get the best meat at the meat market, and you could do. And generally, then we're spending 5 and 6 hours, especially then if you or your spouse is going out in the middle of the week because somebody forgot taco shells. We start to look at the amount of time that we're spending at this, and so when we want to start looking at really shifting our money situation, we have to do it in a way that we're going to be saving time, money, and energy all at once. That's the best way to do it, because where most people fail when it comes to trying to get their money stuff in order is that then it pulls from their time or energy resources that they actually don't have to give, right? So if you're already exhausted every day, and I'm like, well, Katie, you're going to need a complicated spreadsheet and to track your transactions every single day to make this work. And you already are stressed with homeschooling and stressed with all of the tasks of like motherhood, keeping a house, working, having a podcast, and you don't have those resources to give. You could try, but it's going to last like a week or two. And then we're going to reiterate that you're bad at money. Well, not we, like you're going to have that whole conversation with yourself about not sticking to your plan. And that erodes self-trust, which is really, really important when it comes to making these longer term situations. So the big suggestion here is to look at your time, money, and energy as interconnected. And then really be frank with yourself is, all right, if I'm buying takeout because I'm so exhausted, does it actually make sense to go to 3 different grocery stores on Saturday to buy the cheapest of the groceries if I don't have time to food prep?
Right. Because then the money you spend on that one, oh no, I ran out of time takeout meal, or oh no, I ran out of money takeout meal, it's overcompensating, or it's like covering over any money you saved on your groceries.
Yes.
Completely.
And decision fatigue is real. Decision fatigue and impulse control is really, really very real. So by the time you get to the third grocery store, anyways, especially if you went with your kids in the cart, at that third grocery store, they're getting you. They're getting you for grape flavored ginger ale. Like they're getting you for extra fruit snacks. Because you wasted all of your strength at the first 2 stores. Not wasted, but you used it. And now the third, they're like, but could we have the raspberry sorbet? And you're like, yeah, okay, just go ahead. I don't know. Does that happen to anybody else? That happens to me. Just throw it in there. Sure.
Right. Well, and the more, it's like every store you step foot into, you have the opportunity to potentially spend more instead of save more in a way, right? Especially if your mindset isn't in the right place.
Yeah, that's it. So generally, we want to look at our transactions through a lens of time, money, energy. And that wider view helps us to be more efficient with our time and our energy. And then the money gets way easier when you're not stretched as far as time and energy goes.
It's a great perspective because a lot of financial gurus just talk about the money, but you're right. It can't be in isolation. Like we're a whole human body. And some of your stories, Brie, have made it very clear that you're a mom. So catch our readers up, or our listeners up. What ages are your kids, and what challenges have your kids maybe brought to your budget, or maybe not challenges?
Well, I have a daughter who's 18 and then my son is 13. And really, I would just, more or less the challenges is just when somebody surprises me and by like coming to wake me up and they're like, oh, I need a permission slip and a check, or, I need lunch money. But the way our school does it is it's not like you don't get it for today. You like put, like $100 or $200 into their school bank account. So then I'm like, oh, all right, like right this second. So it's nothing that's super unexpected, but sometimes it's a surprise.
Well, yeah, because kids aren't always the best communicators. We know that. And we got to talk top down. Like we're going to dig in, I think, a little more to budget and kind of your overall strategies. But I know the parents in the audience are thinking like, okay, I've got to get my stuff together for myself. But also, I think the first thing you said basically was use the compound interest when you are in your 20s. And so most of us listening are not in our 20s anymore, but our kids will be kind of soon. So like, how do we build a good money mindset for our kids? What kind of teaching have you done for your 13 and your 18-year-old?
I primarily work with adults. When it comes to suggesting for kids, some of the things that we can do that's best for them is to work on our stuff. So when they think about money, they're not thinking about lack, stress, limitations, fighting. Those are the things that we can do. So that way, when they will subconsciously have a better relationship with money. So that's some of it. As far as education, one of my favorite books that I read in my 20s is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And he explains advanced investment ideas and strategies in really simple stories. And it's a book that's got enough story and enough juicy bits that somebody, maybe a teenager, but somebody certainly in their early 20s could really get a lot out of that. That's a great place to start too.
That's a great tip. And I know you worked with teens long ago at that Boys and Girls Club. So you kind of know how they think. And I love the idea of modeling so that kids aren't starting from a feel of limitations. But like, what have you done with your 18-year-old to kind of help her manage money? I mean, she has a job now, right? And so what do you say to her about spending?
So I don't actually really too much judgment on her spending, but one of the things that we did do is we opened up a Roth IRA account, and she just puts a little bit in there, right? And she doesn't have to put that much because that money is going to have many times to double. So it's more about building the habit and building that financial strength, right? So that's a lifelong habit. I mean, that's like the main actually thing that we've done. And she pays for her car insurance. So she's got some level of responsibility. And then I don't really bust her chops too much about her spending.
But that habit of putting a little money away, I mean, that habit won't disappear, hopefully, which means that the system of putting the money away won't disappear, and all that money will just accrue and accrue and accrue interest, which is great.
Yeah. And you want really those habit loops to be well formed. So when we think about like brushing your teeth, that's a lifelong habit. So on any given day, if I said, well, Katie, why do you brush your teeth? I mean, like, yeah, of course you want to have your teeth when you're a senior citizen, but really today it just feels gross to not to. Today it just feels like something you have to do. Like it would feel unnatural to go about your day with unbrushed teeth. And so we want those habit loops to be really well established. And then that way too, if anything happens and that habit gets disrupted, maybe maternity leave or, something happens, then you can go right back to it. The same way people go right back to smoking cigarettes, even though that's, that's like, we try to avoid that, but that's the same. Those habit loops are still there. And so we can reopen them back up if they're really well established.
So investing is a great habit loop. Let's talk about the opposite with our teens and debt. I know that you do talk a lot about student loans, and it's a rough environment right now. I mean, we've got, I've got a 19-year-old, I've got a 15-year-old, they're looking at college. Oh my goodness, we're talking six figures in debt, Brie. What do you say to parents to say to their teens about student loan debt?
What I found from working with teenagers, college students, is they literally do not have enough life experience to grasp the level of what we're talking about financially. They cannot understand it. They don't. So we have to be really protective, because when you're a kid, you're like, oh, I'll make $30,000 a year. And that is an amount of money that can seem so wildly extravagant because you've never paid a mortgage, you've never paid taxes, you've never put gas in your car and like you just don't really understand what that means. When I was doing more investment advising, one of the rules of thumb that I had was an appropriate amount of debt would probably be somewhere around the first year starting salary for the position that you'd be going for. So if you were a teachers in my area, starting teachers probably start in the middle 40s, coming out of school with some, in the middle 40s worth of debt it will be something that's reasonable to pay off. But if you start, if you borrow $160,000 to make 40 grand, we're going to have that's not, that math's going to really, really be painful. What we really have to look at is how highly we value education. And I'll just drop like a little cultural context, but during the Vietnam War, kids who were in college didn't get drafted. And so there was the benefit of the education, but also there was this other benefit. I don't know the exact years of all of the things, but it was about that time that student loans started to become available. And so this idea of getting college education and being professional and being able to make higher and higher levels of money, along with this other benefit that really, really made it important to people. We have a really, really high value on college education. And over the last years, the price of college has really, really gone up, and the wages around those things have really not, because now it's not something extra special that really sets you apart. It's kind of like, well, we'll just ask for a degree because everybody's got one. And so we really want to be looking at, well, does this actually require an education? Would trade school, would a trade actually be better? And there are some career paths that certainly do require, formal education. But we just have to really be careful, because if you were to put 100 grand and 4 years of dedicated work into a business, you're very likely going to have a very successful business. Not to say that all people should have a business, but it's something to consider, because if you're borrowing 4 years of tuition and living expenses for a degree that's going to pay you 40, 50,000,
I want to send a huge thank you to today's podcast sponsor, Hapsy. We are all about getting good sleep here in the Kimball household. And if your kids are going to spend 1/3 of their time in a certain place, to me, that's where you prioritize high quality surfaces, non-toxic stuff, and organic. A lot of our mattresses here at the Kimball House are made by the Naturepedic brand. Great news, Naturepedic's sister brand, Hapsy, uses a lot of the same materials, is equally as non-toxic, and they are much more affordable. So that's the one I want to share with you today. Hapsy is GOTS certified organic cotton. They do not use glues and adhesives because they have individually pocketed springs, and they use GOTS certified organic wool, not polyester fill. And here's the big one when it comes to mattresses. There are no flame retardants. That is the big, huge risk when we go to sleep on a conventional mattress, that there are flame retardants that are proven to cause health issues in our kids' bodies and in our bodies, and they're breathing those in and being exposed to those all night long. Again, sleep is where we prioritize our organic dollars, and I would love to introduce you to Hapsy. Check them out at kidscookrealfood.com/Hapsy. That's HAPPSY. Huge thank you to Hapsy for being our podcast sponsor today.
Because if you're borrowing 4 years of tuition and living expenses for a degree that's going to pay you $40,000,
it's a big investment. It's massive. And Brie, I'm just so glad to hear you saying this, because I think more and more parents, and then thus the teens and the next generation of teens, need to start shifting that paradigm and shifting that mindset that maybe college isn't the only path to success. I think it's coming. I think it's happening. It was 5 years ago for my husband and I, when our paradigm shifted. We actually heard a keynote speech at an entrepreneurs conference, and the guy put up a graph and said, listen, here's the average starting salaries. And the line was fairly flat. And then here's the average cost of college right now. And it was that hockey stick where it just shot way up. And he said, this is starting to not make sense. And we need a disruption in the industry, just like Uber disrupted the taxi industry and Airbnb disrupted the hotel industry. And we thought, oh my goodness, really? Like, we grew up in the 90s where everyone went to college unless you were not successful, basically, right? And so it's time. Like, I'm hoping that we're on that precipice and that we'll start to see more and more mindsets shift.
Well, we were also raised by the people who remembered Vietnam.
Yeah.
Like, our parents very likely were alive through that. And so my parents value education at a very different level from, and that's part of it. Because when they were growing up, college really set you apart. Going to college was really a big deal. It was like more of a guarantee of having this success. And so by the time the 90s came around, I use my degree. I mean, I'm not mad at it. I'm not like against college. I just think what we have to do is really evaluate it as an investment and not as a necessity.
Right. And look at the dollars. I mean, a lot of kids are going off to college and thinking about how the campus will feel and, how prestigious the university is and stuff like that. The dollars, the budget has to be a line item on that pro-con list, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that I explained it is just how highly we value the college experience. And listen, I've talked to clients that don't value it much at all because the tuition is the part that gets the ROI, and the college experience, maybe not so much. And I've had other clients really highly value the college experience, maybe more so than the tuition. And that's up to you to decide. That's not up to me to decide. But we do really probably want to look at those things as the tuition is the place where we are going to see that ROI. And there's a certain ROIs, networking, friendships. Lots of people meet their spouses in college and things like that. So it's not to say that it doesn't have value. It's just we really, really want to look at it. I'll give you a quick story. I had a client who was a teacher, and she borrowed $160,000 to go to school in Boston.
Whew, ouch.
And like I said, I'm telling you, when you're 18, you cannot fathom the amounts of money. So even though she was a smart kid, she was 18, she didn't know better. And when she got to be a grown-up, she came to see me in her middle 30s, maybe almost 40. And she was still paying $1,600 a month. That's half of her take home. That was like almost half of her take home after her insurance and or whatever else. And she was so mad about, she was seething with resentment towards her parents for letting her do this. She was like, they knew, they could see what I cannot see, and they let me do this to myself. And the level of bitterness for this woman was, it was unfortunate, but you're also like, oh, hey girl, I feel you.
Well, thank you for that story. I mean, we parents, we need to hear these stories because we need to hear, we try not to meddle or we try not to run our children's lives. And those are very good goals, but we can also bring a big dose of reality, right? Like what does take home pay on a 40 or 50,000 or even an $80,000 a year? Like you don't get to keep even all that, like just that one fact of take home pay versus gross pay is foreign for most kids. So do you, for like, you have an 18-year-old and a 13-year-old, do you ever talk about your own budget so that they can hear actual numbers about kind of where the money is going? Is that something that you model?
Yeah, we talk about it a bit. I'm not too much, but there was definitely a day where my daughter was asking me for something at Walgreens. It was like gummy bears. And I was like, no, we were literally on our way to a party. And I said, no, we're not going to get gummy bears right now. And she's like, why are we so broke? And I was like, we're not broke. Like, you can't first, we're not getting gummy bears because we're on our way to go eat a meal with treats. We're literally at Walgreens in the car on the way there. We were buying a birthday card. And I was like, second, the bills get paid, the money gets saved, the money gets invested. We do this, we do this, we do this. And then there's spending money. And spending money sometimes runs out. I said, in this case, this isn't about money. This is really about now's not the time to get gummy bears. But, because sometimes our kids will just assume things about money, and sometimes we have to explain things like for littler kids, they're like, well, you have your ATM card, so you have money because they just see us they just see us swipe this little plastic card and then the thing that we want just magically gets paid for. And we don't see that trade. We don't see that exchange. So, like when I was a kid, my dad almost always paid for everything with cash. Debit cards weren't really a thing yet. And so I would watch him take cash out of his wallet. He would pay with his paper money. We would get the things. He would leave the paper money at the store and we would go. And so I knew that he had less paper money, because I could see it literally. But now the kids don't see that. We take the debit card, we swipe it, and we take the debit card and we put it back in our wallets. And so they don't see that exchange. So for the littler kids, you can explain those sort of things to just help open up their eyes so that way they're not like, this is an unlimited source of cash resources just available.
It's a great idea for parents of littles to just narrate. What does this mean? What is it? What's actually happening behind the scenes? And to use cash sometimes. I mean, for me, that's one of the beauties of the farmer's market, although that's changing too. I mean, 10 years ago, most farmers at the farmer's market only could take cash, so that was an awesome opportunity to take my kids. I'd give them the $20, and they could see that exchange. Now, so many of them have Square. It's like it's the same problem, but I try to use cash anyway. Well, first of all, because I'm a business owner. And so I know that the credit card is like taking some percentage from their profit, but also because I want my kids to see that. And we've had some awesome farmers who have like counted back the change and like interact with the kids. And it just makes my heart so happy.
Oh yeah. So good.
So, okay. So when it comes to getting ahead, like we're talking about, we parents need to model good financial relationship with money, good financial stewardship. We've got inflation going crazy right now in 2024 when we're recording this. How can people get ahead when the economy is not friendly?
Honestly, the best way to do it is to ask for a raise. That inflation is evidence that there's more money in the economy, and the businesses have been charging higher rates for a good minute now. So they have the more money. So now's a good time to ask for a raise. There's some studies that are out that more or less say you kind of have to be willing to job hop a little bit in this economy to get really big, to get big raises or promotions or whatever. And sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not true, but I'd be asking for a raise, and I would also be getting my resume together to be in that opportunity of looking for more if that's what you want. You cannot out budget inflation. You just can't. The dollars are worth less. Like that's just the simple fact of it. So you have to make more to work with inflation. That's the solution. And you can cut back a little bit for a little while, but that's not a long-term fix.
Yeah, I totally agree. So your system is super unique. I love it. I love how you flip paradigms on their head. What do you see as what makes your system or your recommendations different from what most people hear? And like just kind of advice us, Brie. We want to hear it.
So when we want to start working on a relationship with money, one of the first places that we want to start is really looking at what's going out. Because you're never going to be able to put a budget or a plan or anything like that together until you're really aware of what's going out. Because the question that a budget will beg is, well, what needs to stop happening so that way the money is able to do what it wants to do, right? So people want a budget because all their money's gone and they didn't put their money where they want it to go. So we have to be looking at, well, what do we want to be different? Right? And it's not about restriction, but it's about prioritization. When we're looking for how to save money, I actually teach this in a course that I have called Find the Bleed, but we want to be looking at our transactions. And like I suggested earlier, through that lens of time and money, because most of the time the big money that we can save is really going to be around the efficiencies around things. But sometimes we get a little habit blind, is what I would call it, where we don't really register how much we spent at the grocery store in 3 or 4 different transactions. We don't really register these things that are just kind of viewed as normal and necessary. And so then we think we have to give up our yoga classes or our kids' art artwork classes, things like that. And then we kind of feel resistance around the budget anyways. In all of my years, and I've worked with thousands of people, I've read tens of thousands of transactions. It's very, very rare that I have to look at somebody's transactions and actually suggest that they cut out their yoga classes or they cut out coffee or things like it's incredibly rare. Most of the time I'm like, well, let's optimize your shopping. Let's optimize, the ways that your household procurement. Let's systemize your household procurement. And most of the time that in and of itself does the trick. Then from there, once you start to have your money you start to have some money to work with. I teach a thing that I call the invisible system. And how that's different is, all right, so budgets are cool. You put together a plan. But I know for me, plans don't always go as planned. And so I started to systemize the money. The way that kind of works is I'll have, for clients, I have their pay me first money, their investment money, an account for bills, an account for working capital, which is all of the things that are not emergencies that you definitely see coming. Things like your taxes, your car repairs, your trips to see your ailing parents, the fact that you're going to host Christmas or holiday birthday parties for people who homeschool, curriculums or back to school shopping, the stuff that we see coming, right? August, we see back to school shopping coming. So we set money aside for that. And then the things like vacations or home upgrades, the stuff that's important to us. And then we have our pocket money. We want to start to look at separating these money by purpose rather than by line item. And then we do that with separate bank accounts. Now, the reason for that is so that way when you log into your bank account and you see how much money is left in your pocket money account, you are very clear on how much money you have to spend. All right, when my bills are paid, I have the money in the bills account. I save the money for the working capital account. There's money in there, but I know that all of that money is allocated toward things that I need. I have funds for my vacation. All right. And I have, $86 between now and Thursday when I get paid. I need a little tank of gas. Okay, I'll go out to lunch and I won't go out to lunch. It helps us to reduce the amount of decisions because most people are not overspending because they're stupid, because anything's wrong with them, because they're reckless, because they're bad at money. It's just when they look at the bank account, when they look at their bank account in a moment and they're making a decision like, oh, should I go out to lunch? If their car insurance didn't hit yet, if that check didn't clear yet, they think they have money that they don't. And then the check clears and then they're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And so we accidentally overspend. For most people, the main thing that they don't factor in is that working capital money. And then if that's not factored in, that usually ends up on the credit cards. So when we systemize our money and we get technology to do some of it, so it's like we'll set up our automatic savings habits. We'll set up our transfers to happen automatically. We'll set up these systems so that way we can manage our money really, really quickly and effectively. It eliminates so much work. It's like it takes a little bit more time to set up. I'll be totally honest with that. The system takes a couple weeks to set up and then you have to get used to it. So that usually takes 2 or 3 pay cycles to get used to it. But then you're set up and then you can make very small adjustments when you get a raise or, if you switch a job or if, you buy a new car or things, the system doesn't need updating. But I've found that clients who stick to the system do so much better because the system does most of the work. So they have just a little bit of work to do to keep it all going. Where when a budget, it's like every month we're starting from zero, we're starting from scratch. And when life gets a little hectic, 4 weeks goes by real fast. Our paycheck comes in and goes out really fast. So systems, right? Like you're in business, I'm in business. Like when somebody's like, oh, I have a plan. I'm like, cool, where are your systems? Because we know that systems are create success way more than plans.
I love that. It's coming right back to those primary resources, right, Brie? Where you put a little bit of time and energy in up front, but then I can just see the time and energy being saved in the future, and then you can save more money.
Yep. And that's how to do it. And so then clients will come, they'll be like, oh, I have $10,000 for the first time ever. I've paid off my credit cards for the first time ever. But it's the system that does it, because then they know how much they have to spend. They're like, oh, I have this much money to spend between now and this much money. And then because that's a different level of decision making than making sure that we have, money for heating oil and snow tires and things like that.
That must make you feel so good when people say, oh my gosh, I have $10,000 in savings for the first time.
It lights me up. I love my work. It's my favorite thing ever.
Oh, so cool. Well, we talk a lot about food here at Kids Cook Real Food. So do any of your tips impact the food budget specifically? Like what's a gem in that category?
When I'm working with clients, most of the time it's not their groceries that are the problem, but people usually try to cut back on groceries. And I was telling you that groceries is one of the areas that, all right, listen, if you're throwing a lot of food away, then cut back on groceries. If you don't need them, then stop buying them. But if you're eating your groceries, if you're not throwing away a lot of food, then that's usually not the area to cut back on. And here's why, is because I know for me, and I've talked to, lots and lots of clients, that when our refrigerator gets empty and we're already at the end of the day and our decision fatigue's already set in a little bit, and we're like, all right, well, what am I going to feed these people? I don't know, man. I don't have any, like when your refrigerator gets empty, you don't have anything really to put together. So spending adequately on groceries is a great money saving tip. And then also to give yourself a little grace for the truth of what you need. Because I know for me that sometimes when I'm looking at my groceries, I'm like, it's Sunday and I'm thinking about, I just got a sourdough starter. So I've mentioned sourdough a couple times, but I got my sourdough in the kitchen and it's on hour 4 of its 64-day process to become bread. I'm like, yeah, I'm on Pinterest and I'm thinking about what kinds of things I can stuff into mason jars because I'm in my full domestic goddess mode. But on Tuesday afternoon, I'm like, literally, I don't want to cook. I don't even care if I eat. If everybody starves, I'll be okay with it. Right? Like, so we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace. And one of the things that I've suggested that clients really love is keeping some just like emergency frozen food, like a Stouffer's lasagna, or what you told me your favorite thing, an organic chicken sausage.
Yeah. I mean, just, I use that same strategy, but it's just usually organic Costco sausages that we can throw on the griddle and cook up in 5 minutes. So Perfect. It's very similar, just slightly different food choice, right? But it's about having that emergency stash instead of the emergency takeout run, right?
Yeah, because that's it. We need something that we can get together with low effort, low time, or, sometimes things can take a little bit more time, but they're no effort. Sometimes we're not in the mood to think about what to feed everybody and to deal with everybody's preferences. So sometimes really just like a frozen pizza or just like a chicken patty, or whatever your kids will eat and be happy about it. That sort of stuff really, really helps because it's just something that you have on hand.
Right. And it is that balance between the time, the energy, and the expense. I know years ago, our neighbors, multiple times a week, they would be running to the store for one ingredient for dinner. And we were on a really tight budget at that time. And I just thought, I don't get it. Like I could never I would just not make that meal for me, right? Because like I already had that mindset of there's no way I'm going into the store for one thing because it takes so much time, and there's no way you're getting the sale. I was like, oh, I just couldn't live that way. But everyone has, like you said, it's kind of their own personality. So that family would need to work with their whatever God's given them, to be able to plan ahead or not. But very different.
Yeah, and I have a real hard time getting out of the store with one thing. I'll tell you, I do this work. I make suggestions to people, but the reason that I say stay out of Target is because when I go in there, man, it smells like coffee. They got a Starbucks up front. All of a sudden, I went in. The last time I went to I almost never go to Target, but the last time I went there, I went to go buy forks because I guess if you have kids, your forks just disappear. So anyways, on my fork, we were down to like 3 forks, but there's 4 of us that live here. So I was like, all right, let me go buy some forks. $284 later, I was like, what even happened? I got in my car and I was like, what even happened? What did I even get?
We're fighting against millions of dollars, probably billions of dollars in marketing where Target, etc., they want us to buy things. So they're going to get us in. They're going to trick us into spending more. That's their job. And it's our job to figure out how to push back.
Yeah. So I like to eliminate as many trips to the physical store as possible.
And you know what, friends listening, if you take nothing away from this podcast except that right there, that's gold. Eliminate as many physical trips to the store as possible. Super smart. Where else should people start, Brie? Like, I love to leave parents with kind of one simple step. So, I mean, I chose mine. I don't want to steal your thunder. What's the one thing that you think parents should do today for a quick win?
I gave you some tips on the spending and on the systems. So I would say adding in a little gratitude practice, especially with your kids, is because what that does on a like in your literal brain wiring, is it shifts your perception to what you do have. And that really opens things up inside of your mind. And every single book about wealth, and from Napoleon Hill to The Science of Getting Rich, to every book on money manifestation ever, they all start with like a gratitude practice. And even if, in the major religions, they're like, thanks and praise, thanks and praise. And so it's a gratitude practice is one of those things where you can do it for a few minutes a day, write it down, speak it out loud, practice with your kids, but it really tunes us to what we have. And that really, really helps to avoid that cycle of what I don't have, what I lack. Because when we think down those kind of roads, we can get ourselves real freaked out and into scarcity in just a few minutes. Like people can really think themselves into panic level not havingness very, very quickly. So adding in like a family gratitude practice, or just a gratitude, or you can do it solo. I mean, it just feels good. It boosts your mood.
Brie Sodano, the money lady, is telling you to incorporate a gratitude practice because you're so holistic and I love it. We could probably talk for another 45 minutes, but we don't have that kind of time. Tell people where they can find you if they want to learn more.
So I have my own podcast called the Cash Confident Podcast with Brie Sodano. And that's probably the best place. That's where all of my juiciest free talks, essentially, my monologues, they're there. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, Cash Confident Community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brie. This was fantastic and full of nuggets and knowledge.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Katie.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast. I hope your brain feels fed and your heart feels full and that you feel connected, knowing that there are other parents on this journey with you. We're just trying to raise healthy, independent adults. And the next time you think, man, there is no handbook for this job. Now there is the Healthy Parenting Handbook. Look up the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please leave a review, my friends, as that helps other parents who need this information to find us. And of course, subscribe. That's a huge help. You can also look for our shorts as a reel on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook, or subscribe to the Healthy Parenting Handbook Shorts channel on YouTube. You'll get those bite-sized portions of healthy parenting advice.